Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Lighthouse Sessions. I'm excited today. I have my new friend, Barbara Wittmann, with me. Barbara, why don't you introduce yourself and tell my audience a little bit about what you do?
Okay, well, thanks for having me on, Jeff. It's good to be here. So about me, boy, that could be a lengthy story, but I try to keep it crisp. Born and raised in Germany, have lived in Colorado for the past 10 years, moved here for love, now live in Loveland, Colorado. It wasn't planned, by the way. Um, and I have spent the last 25 years fixing broken transformation projects where digital transformation and the alignment of people and technology failed. So, in a sense, I am a recovering consultant because I saw that I was fixing the same thing over and over again, and per definition, that would be insanity, as I learned.
Yes.
So I figured I need to turn the equation around, and I have packaged everything I've learned over the past 25 years, and I am now empowering the people that are actually driving transformation and equipping them with the right people and technology sense to make it successful. And that's what I call digital wisdom. I run the Digital Wisdom Collective. So I basically push for we need to have a human infrastructure, not just technology.
I love that. And I think we're going to go down a few paths. But for what it's worth, I used to refer to myself as a recovering accountant. And then I figured at some point that was an identity I was done with. But I feel you when you say those words.
Yeah, yeah,
It's the way I see it, it's like watching the same train wreck over and over, and you say, and they go, no, 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 we're going to be different, and then it's like, hell, help us! Why didn't we see this coming? I
yeah.
told you so.
Yeah, exactly. But the irony is that we are still wired, and also businesses are still very wired to only get support or fix an issue once it is a train wreck.
Yeah,
And we really need to get more into a proactive angle.
I love that, and it fascinates me. So this is probably where we're going to go. I feel like it's significantly easier and cheaper to avoid a problem. But again, most people are looking at their quarterly results and they're like, oh, we don't have budget for, seat belts, so we'll worry about death later.
Yeah, but remember when seatbelts were invented, people were totally dead set against it.
Yeah.
They're like, I ain't wearing that. Um, so, it always takes a little bit of time to get people convinced. So, yes, essentially, I do offer a seatbelt that makes the journey a lot safer. Um, and it also takes a special type of company and entrepreneur to really see that. So I'm not in for convincing everyone because that would take a whole lot of my energy. It's like, hey, if this resonates and you want to be ahead of the curve, and mind you, with AI really pushing in, we need to have a different way on how we collaborate and co-create between people and machine.
I love it. And I think that's one of my little pet peeves. I'm seeing a lot of, I call them the tech bros, and I don't mean any offense, but they're young, they've never seen projects explode, they've never seen, they don't have the business acumen, and they just come in and say, okay, we're going to fire all your people and the robots are going to take over. And I cringe because there's things robots are good at, there's things humans are good at, and it's not about replacing, it's how do we work together. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's exactly where we need to go. And tech pros are great, and I love working with them. And they have an angle of things that is totally valid. But what we need to learn again to really develop what I would call collective intelligence before we bring artificial intelligence into the equation. And that is on how we are playing nice together and how we bring that tech bro with other functions of the company onto one table, and how do we invent really looking at a bigger picture? Because what's showing up right now, especially with companies that I deal with that have claimed that they don't have any silos anymore, boy, does that come roaring back once you bring AI into the equation. And what I love about AI is that it really shows the ugly underbelly of every company where culture is lacking, where, there's still silos lingering, and how innovation is just not done right.
I see it as the little friction points that everybody ignored because it's not that bad.
Yeah.
And now with AI, it's like looking at it with an electric microscope. You can go right to the atom almost. Like you can see all those little cracks in the surface.
Yeah, totally. But, we also have to grapple with one reality that we cannot fix everything in one go. And I'm sorry, I gave all my magic wands away for Christmas, don't have one. But we also need to see how do we slice the elephant, and where do we need to go to first? And usually the solution is not more technology; it really is bringing the right people to the table and asking the right questions, and actually empower them to bring their voice into the game.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned early, and this brings me joy because I really get annoyed when people say, I help everyone. You mentioned that there are certain people that are for you and certain who aren't. So, if my audience is listening, whose ears are about to perk up, who should be talking to Barbara and saying, hey, Barbara, here's what I got?
Hmm. So if you have a situation where complexity is just outgrowing you, that's usually a good sign. When you are sensing that your system is stretched to the brim, you have a ton of technology in your court, but it really is a little bit like a cluttered garage, and you're kind of wondering how to bring it all to life. And that's where it's fun. The other angle is you are a startup or a scale up that is explosively growing. And you know that you have to take your people along and you have to align the little wheels between process, people, and technology. That's a good sign. So if you want to build something that lasts, and on top of that, if you want to build something that does not rely on consultants entirely, we got to talk.
I love that. And I'm just going to share I have a friend who works in an organization. As of last week, they have one role has 91 different software tools that they use.
Oh,
And
Jesus.
for some tasks, okay, you're sitting down. Um, Most tasks require a minimum of 4 different tools. And I'm like, I'm a smart guy. I would give up and walk out.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that's not an uncommon thing I find because we truly forget what we all have. And that's very human that we always are, striving for the next big thing. But we actually have a lot of value already in house, and you can tweak that just a little bit, even before AI, because AI often comes disguised as automation. That is 100% possible with a bunch of tools you already have.
Well, and I think one of the things I'm seeing too, and I want your opinion on this, there's a lot of people automating tactics without stepping back to look at the strategy. And that terrifies me because what are you missing when you're focused on step 1, step 2, step 3, and nobody's looking ahead saying, oh, we're building, as Stephen Covey used to say, wrong forest.
No, totally. But that's a great metaphor. And that's what I use a bunch because it really is a digital forest. So, how do you find orientation in it? Um, and for that, you're totally correct. Things are being fixed before we understand them. But that really is something that we need to practice. So, understanding the problem before you jump into a solution, that is a core skill that I am practicing with people. Um, and that saves a ton of money because if you're looking at where so much money gets lost in IT initiatives, that's usually the case because you have to course correct. And we are just wired to go, go, go. It's like, oh, let's do this, and then we all just run, and no one dares to ask if we're running in the right direction. Um, so in my mind, it's a huge orientation problem. It's not a capability problem per se. And orientation, I mean, in any forest, you would find way markers that you're like, oh, this is where I have to go. Oh, look, there's a path. And this is what we need to establish, and that is fairly boring, I want to say, because it is not, let's document 500 pages.
Yeah.
It really is, and I'm a little bit old-fashioned. It really is about giving people a map. It's like, hey, oh look, we're here. We want to go here. Yay!
Orientation is the key. I mean, you can
Yeah.
go really fast in the wrong direction, and that's not a good thing. I'm going to share. I met an organization. They were proud that they had 18,000 pages of SOPs, and I was
God,
like,
that's a kiss of death right there.
I can't
I mean,
even
and
imagine how high that is. Like, I'm not going to read 18,000 pages of work-related stuff in my lifetime.
but honestly, that's not very uncommon, because the companies that I work with, they usually are very well documented. They are like, oh, business processes. We got this figured out. We documented 2,000 of them. But then when you ask them and you're like, so, just, put something on the whiteboard to kind of help me understand what is like the big picture. Everyone is quiet.
Yeah.
So yeah, we are usually lacking the things that are holding everything together.
Yeah.
So we have almost like a flight height issue. We are always going to like the most detailed level because we want to do things so good. And what surprises me most is that America has that same issue that I would have only linked to Germans, that we're always wanting to do things perfect.
Well, okay, I'm going to say this rudely, and I'm going to get hate mail, but I've worked with some German consultants, and one of the things I see is that you're looking at the precise, focused detail that matters. A friend of mine drove an Audi, and they're looking at the line, whereas a lot of the North American Canadians are in there too. We're looking at the details, but maybe they don't matter as much. We're worried about what color are the mud flaps when, really we need to worry about the line of the car. So I think a lot of it, and I will look at the car manufacturing. I'm obsessed with Toyota and German car manufacturers. We tend to go for quantity, whereas others go for quality, and the quantity comes from the quality.
Mm-hmm. So, where is the middle ground? And that's what I'm still navigating, coming from two different cultures. But it's so interesting for me to also see where, the ways I grew up in, where they are very limited. And I think that is also challenged on a larger scale when we look at organizations, because, every organization has what I call limiting beliefs. What did we all think that was true for so many years, and what was true that made us successful that may not apply. So yeah.
I'm going to pull that apart because I'm fascinated now that I see it. It is the limiting, like the collective limiting beliefs that it's equally damaging what we think we know that's not true, but also what we don't know. And it's the security of this is the best way. Well, how do you know that? Because that's how we've always done it. And by the way, that's when my head usually explodes.
And that's you would get that answer in so many ways. It's like, we've always done it this way. Why would we question it?
Yeah.
So the interesting piece is, once you give people permission to question these things, a whole lot of magic can happen. But that also implies that you have people working for you that are willing to look at their own limiting beliefs too.
It is fascinating, and I'm connecting some dots here, but years ago, I had a friend who was a business coach, and he wouldn't take on a client unless the client was willing to have an in-house workshop, and the entire company had to go through a limiting beliefs exercise. And I remember when the accountants and engineers would come in the room and their arms are crossed, and they're like, got real work to do. What's this nonsense? And now it's like, why would you initiate any kind of change if you're not willing to look at the assumptions and the beliefs.
Exactly. And I always say change starts with one. So it really starts with, the people that are pushing the change, that they are, cleaning house. Because if I am standing in my own way, I cannot drive transformation.
Well, and the funny thing is, I think part of it is they have to recognize that they're the one in the way. And if they're not willing
Yeah,
to look at their beliefs, you can't move the bit organization if the leader's in the way.
exactly. But it's also something non-prescriptive. If somebody's not willing to do that, then that's great. But for me, it's going to be a real success factor going forward, and maybe even a criteria that's going to go into the hiring best practice books, or how do we view top talent in the future? And to me, a top talent is somebody who wants to change with what's coming, and also stretch and grow as a person, because that to me is absolutely needed. And I mean, obviously, I had to do that to grow in my work. But then, what irritated me for a while, and I didn't have a good answer for that, because people were like, "Well, we need you back, because when you walk into rooms and when you're running meetings, it's so much calmer." Well, that is because I'm not getting my buttons pushed all the time. I'm not looking at people saying, "Ooh, I bet he thinks I'm stupid." Oh, he raised his eyebrows. What's going on? But truth be told, a lot of leaders would, be in that constant conflict, so you cannot read the room when you're grappling with yourself.
Well, and I find that fascinating because honestly, Barbara, I used to think everything was a system problem. You fix the system and everything's great. And then I kept seeing, oh, we're running into people. Oh, there's another person in the way. And I realized that if we don't deal with the people first, nothing else lasts because there's
Mhm.
always somebody that will sabotage it.
Exactly. But the beauty is, you don't need a whole lot of people in the organization that do that house cleaning, because it's contagious. Just like when I walked into a room, people will ask and say, "Hey, what? How do you do this?" So there is a surprisingly low percentage. You have to train in that way in your organization, where it would start to ripple out. And you naturally don't really start with the top level. You would want to hit the middle of the organization, because that is your execution engine. That's where strategy meets the execution. That's the people that need a voice. That's the people you want to be honest with you. If you're a C-level, and you're like, "Oh, I have that great idea," you want people to push back a little bit and say, "Hey, in reality." So yeah.
And sometimes the other big weakness of an organization is the lack of limiting beliefs. They're almost too empowered and they're like, oh, we can do this. And oh, let's do that. And oh, why don't we do that? And
Yeah, the God complex.
yeah,
Yes,
yes.
that happens too.
And I see a lot that, it's sort of scope creep of the business because they're like, oh, we sell widgets. Now we're going to sell gadgets. Now we're going to get into the something else business. And it's like, what do you do exactly?
Right. And sometimes it's important to pivot and move fast. But again, how do you what's your baseline? What's your non-negotiable that you always want to communicate? And that is sometimes lacking. What is the overarching map?
I love it. Now, if somebody was watching this and they said, I like how the way Barbara thinks, what does working with you look like? What's sort of your process for coming in and identifying those little friction points and solving them?
Mhm. So I would usually engage in, on a workshop base with organizations, and to do a little bit of a diagnostic. I do have an assessment tool where I would pressure test certain things and then give you fairly quickly a score of, these are the things that you would have to touch. Um, and then there are several pathways in where I would stay a little bit involved or a little bit heavier, but it always includes that at least 4 people in your organization go through a training exercise to, really open to a different mindset and to join the digital wisdom practice where they are actually getting removed from their organization. Sounds a little bit odd, but where they can practice with other industry leaders and other different hierarchy levels, and they can practice to solve challenges. And that to me is really the magic sauce, because in an organization you are stuck in a little bit of an echo chamber. And we are testing software like crazy before we set it in production. But for people, we expect that they get one training and then it's happy going forward. Yeah. So it is a twofold approach. It is, I come into your organization, help you identify the gaps. Some of you people go into the practice and then basically bring back what they learned and start building that human infrastructure on their own power. I don't want to be stuck in a consulting engagement for a long time.
I've had a couple of those where it's like, oh my God, I didn't build an exit here.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Like, and that's, I fundamentally believe if anything depends on me, I haven't quite finished. And yeah, it's sometimes you get in and you're looking at the people going, there's nobody here that can take this.
Yeah.
They're not going to run with it. So
right, and that would basically be a killing criteria. If I come in and I do the assessment and I'm like, I don't see anyone here, that be it.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
I got good news and bad news. The good news is it's not my problem.
Well, I would find a nice way of conveying that. But keep in mind, I'm German. I'm pretty direct. So, hey.
I grew up, I'm German ancestry. My grandparents were first generation. So, yeah, I get the German candor. That's
yeah. Yeah.
And mine was, filtered because it was a couple of generations ago. But, I firmly believe we actually did a project once. We were helping with a factory in Germany. It was owned by the US company, and the German shop foreman kept making my colleague cry because she'd grown up in America and she believed everybody should be polite and you sugarcoat things. And he's like, why is he so mean? And I'm like, he just told you what the problem is. Good news, now we can fix it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's the beauty of intercultural work, right? And hey, I've been here for 10 years. I've mellowed quite a bit. So
but it's that singular focus, I think, that makes people unnerved, but it's also there's a place for it. So what are some of the we've talked kind of generally about what's going on, but what are some of the big friction points you see, or your top 3 that you encounter the most, where people throw their hands up and say, we need to bring somebody in?
Mm-hmm. So the biggest friction points are usually between 3 departments. One is between operations and IT, because they are at odds. One wants one thing, the other is usually talking about we can't do it. You can guess which one that is.
Yeah.
Right. So that usually stifles progress quite a bit. So fixing that is a huge piece. And then the third one is to bring HR into the equation, because for HR leaders, it is about thinking outside of what they know in how to develop people. We really need to start thinking about people and resources like an infrastructure. You would upgrade continuously what you have in servers and cybersecurity and so on. And we need to start doing that for people as well. So, there's AI literacy and all that stuff is great, but there's a whole other level we need to learn. So if ops, IT, and HR are in a happy place, playing well together, then you are in a great situation to grow.
I love that. And it's funny because I look at it from the perspective, there's almost always friction between marketing and sales and operations. So you're kind of completing the other side of the circle.
Yeah.
One thing I find fascinating, and this is probably followed me my whole career. I'm one of those weirdos. You give me a new piece of software, I will spend a weekend or an evening. I'll dive in and I can tell you everything about it tomorrow.
Mhm.
I'm fascinated by the lack of training. And let me rephrase that. Most of the training is technical. Here's how to use this. I
Yeah.
find it fascinating that there's no workflow. Here's how you use it, why you use it, when you use it, and for God's sake, here's when you don't, and what you don't do. I think there's so much. People are teaching, click here, push this button, do that. Nobody's teaching the thought that goes into those push here, whatever.
Exactly. And then how do you get back to a feedback loop? How do you share best practice? How do you reinforce a learning cycle? And that's super important for AI because everyone is kind of, typing away. But I'm sure, if you bring people together and say, hey, how do you use this? What can we learn from each other? It's a whole different world. And you're actually speeding up the machine instead of slowing it down. But that is a whole different quality of interaction we need to learn, and also about how do you create a safe space where that can happen? Because no one will want to admit that I don't know how to use this, or I'm always doing it like this because I was nodding off when they were doing the training. I mean, hey,
Right.
that happens, right? But that's exactly the point. We need to start moving away from thinking trainings and programs and consulting. We need to weave all of this into what is the practice we are adopting.
Yeah. It's funny. A friend of mine built software, and what he would do is build it, put it in the hands of people, watch how they actually used it, and then he put in context little help videos and stuff like that. And all of his colleagues and peers and his investors were like, faster, faster. And he's like, if people don't use it, I'm not going to sell it.
That's exactly the point, and that is a beautiful example. But I can also say that a ton of developers would cringe at that thought because it's like, well, we know best. So yeah, the, have you heard the term of DAO, dumbest available user?
I have not heard that.
So that is the biggest fear of every consultant or software person, that that a DAO is sitting at your program and is clicking in places that you have never even thought about. Um, but that's where the truth happens.
Yeah.
Um, and I was working for SAP at the start of my career, and my job was to go out and see how people are using the software. And it's amazing what you learn, because it's like, well, why do you have an Excel sheet here? Why do you do that? So yeah.
It's funny. A friend of mine used to refer to it as idiot proofing. And then he said, once I figured out that I can't keep idiot proofing, because every time I think I've done it, the world finds me a new batch of idiots. Um, I was like, or we could look at it from, the engineer side. This is what it was meant to do. And, I'll tell you an example of that. But for the user, again, if you look at how they actually work, they don't want to jump around and click 15 things. They just step one, step two. And I find it
Yeah.
fascinating. I actually know people who develop software and then give it to the user for feedback. And I'm like, wouldn't you want the user's feedback first?
As you go along, yeah, totally. But that's the expert dilemma, that we think we know best, and if we bring people along, it's so much easier. Like if you look at the AI problem, we think that people need courses in prompt engineering, but what is prompt engineering? It essentially is how to ask good questions with the right
Yeah.
context. So maybe you have to fix first how you talk to one another. Um, that would be a baseline, right?
Yeah. It's funny because as a user of AI, first thing I saw early on was how it kind of, would paraphrase and ask. And I finally went, I have the feeling communication is more important than anything. So help me communicate better. And then it started teaching me how to communicate. And it was just amazing because the better I got at talking to myself, the better
Yeah.
I got at talking to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are thinking about how do you delegate to your coworkers, because we all have the context, or we are assuming that we have the context. So, just kind of tossing over the fence and saying, "Hey, can you take that over?" Maybe we also want to clarify that a little bit more.
Well, it's funny because I find me personally, the three skills I look for are life experience, because if you don't know what real life looks like, how do you design it? Then it's curiosity, because you've got to ask questions. And then it's communication, because it's not about me saying something and going, okay, thank you, Barbara, we're done. It's, okay, Barbara, what did you hear me say?
Exactly. But I would want to throw in one more that
Ooh,
is super important, and that is judgment.
ooh, yes. See, I assume judgment, but that is critical to, explicitly state, right?
Judgment is an underrated thing, and it's becoming critically important, as we are moving in a world that doesn't ask us to just connect the dots, but connect the dots while they're all moving.
Yep. It's funny because I literally, judgment is baked into everything I do, but it's so baked in, I assume it. But I'm going to share something you'll find amusing. I build custom GPTs for people. That's one of my projects. And people kept coming back and saying, this GPT sucks because, this one sucks because. And what I realized, you'll laugh at this, I build specialists. They're good at one thing and they know what their one thing is. And I would tell the human, this is a specialist in this one thing. If you want, recipes that involve chicken, you use this one. Recipes with beef, you go to this one. But what they didn't realize, and this was a user interface problem, custom GPTs use ChatGPT's interface. So
Yeah,
once they get the chicken recipe, then they say, well, can we go talk about how chickens grow? And the fundamental problem was the lack of judgment, because GPTs, being GPTs, they want to help. So sure, I can talk about that.
yeah.
Uh, so I've learned to build in guardrails, and now people get annoyed because the specialist GPT for chicken won't let them talk about beef and pork. And it's like, oh my God, we've lost
Uh,
sight of what a specialist is.
Well, judgment is one piece, but the other piece I see as a human superpower that AI will never be able to take away from us. It's sense making.
Mm-hmm.
How do we interpret all the moving pieces that we see? So yeah.
I find it fascinating because I used to design for the system, and now I'm recognizing, and this was just one of those, both a frustrating moment and an exciting moment, when you realize that no matter what you build, and sorry, but no matter how fine the German engineering is, if you've got that, what do you call it, dumbest available user?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you mean you're not supposed to drive the car into the water?
But it also goes back to understanding the problem and really also not assuming things. What are the assumptions that need to be brought to the table that everyone carries? And then you think you've understood the same thing, and it still differs.
I love that. And I think for me, it's just, I'm infinitely curious. So when I look at something, and it fascinates me, because what people come to me with, and they'll say, oh, you got to fix this, it's never that. It's always something three rows over, or it's something that they didn't see. And it's funny because I see a lot of department fighting, and the least popular group is, IT takes a lot of heat, but usually the accounting department, because they say no more than IT, because we got budget, we got this. But when you look at the friction between departments, there's a lot of value we can unlock just by taking away little friction points.
Absolutely. And the one thing I would say is that if these departments that are heavy under pressure, be it accounting, IT, and sometimes R&D, they would just sit together and, exchange their struggles and how they're dealing with them, they could learn a whole lot about each other and possibly support.
I love this modern age of AI. And, one of my favorite things is looking at the silo of marketing. What are the things marketing knows that nobody else does? And then I look at the sales department and it's like, oh my God, there's so much in the CRM that's not. And then you get to the service level and there's usually support tickets and, stuff between. And it's like we've let so much corporate knowledge just fester in quiet little junk drawers that we haven't even figured out how to mine them. And I look at those and it's like the support tickets is gold for marketing and sales.
That's totally true, but that's because we have lost sight of end-to-end processes that, naturally go beyond one department. And we've also lost sight of who we are actually doing this for, because at the end, every department is servicing the end user experience. So how can we make the customer happier? And if you are defining one gateway question for everything, genius or stupid, you do in your company, it really helps.
Yeah. And I think that's, I always look at the North Star, and my North Star is, does this activity add value to the end user? And if it doesn't, why are we doing it?
No, absolutely. I mean, my North Star is, does this add orientation
Yeah.
for people and organizations? If it doesn't, I'm not, pursuing it.
I love it. Now, you and I could have a long conversation about any one of these topics, but I want to be respectful of your time. I am German after all, so I start and end on time. Where can people go to connect with you and learn more about working with you and what that looks like?
Yeah. So easiest would be find me on LinkedIn. The other one would be check out the website, digitalwisdom.co for Colorado. That is a fairly static place, I have to say. I've neglected it a little bit. Where there's more dynamic and more of my original thinking is on my Digital Wisdom Collective Substack.
Excellent. And we'll put links to all of that as well. So is there anything you wish I would have asked, we should have talked about that we haven't yet?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We could have talked a lot more about Germans and Americans, but hey,
It is fascinating. You see these cultures and you think, okay, I use this word, they use the same word. We all communication accomplished. No.
Yeah, maybe you should talk to my husband next.
It is a fascinating thing. And I think that, I always approach life as out of curiosity. So I'm always curious. And it's amazing. You learn more by being curious than being confident that you know everything. So
Yeah. What I still haven't figured out, I have to say, what is it with Americans going in their pajamas into a grocery store? That is the big mystery to me. So, if somebody can answer that for me, great.
okay, everybody listening, if you know the answer, it baffles me, so I don't have an answer. But Barbara, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day, and it was a real pleasure to chat with you and learn more about what you do.
Thank you. Great talking to you.